Well, really appreciate everybody having me here today, and I'm excited to talk to all of you about competing with Goliaths. And my son was nice enough to pose for this picture with me in preparation for the conference today. I am going to talk all about market share and capturing revenue through fee-for-service business. So I know we've talked, a lot about health reform, a lot about all of the opportunities in healthcare. I'm going to focus on just a sliver of that, just the fee-for-service component and gaining market share, and how we're seeing hospitals around the country do that successfully. I really enjoyed Randy's presentation and Fred's presentation, and hopefully there'll be some complement to that and some of the things that I'll cover as well, because needless to say, we're seeing some of the same things happen in the industry that they articulated to us in the presentation earlier today. I'll start by just telling you a little bit about True North, the company I work for, and a little bit about me too. So True North's a content marketing firm. We've been around for 25 years, and we work with a lot of critical access hospitals, a lot of rural hospitals. We also work for a lot of for-profit and some of the largest hospital systems in the country all over, and I've been really fortunate to work with them for about 12 years now, a little more, almost 13. And so you won't be surprised that what I'm going to talk largely about is content marketing and how we're seeing it used really successfully, particularly in rural environments and critical access environments to make an impact. But to tell you the story about content marketing, I need to tell you a quick story about myself, which is ever since I was a kid, I've loved magazines. I grew up in the rural South, and I remember going to the grocery store with my mom when I was a kid, and she'd let me go flip through the magazine racks at the grocery store. And I always loved how magazines could give you this sense of place and experience. Like I read GQ magazine, and I could tell what it would feel like to be in the big city, and Outside magazine had this intrepid naturalist feel to it. And then Field and Stream kind of felt like where I grew up and the people that I was around. So I always had this connection to that kind of piece of content. And by the time I got to college, I had a professor ask me what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I said, I want to be a publisher for a magazine. Well, that was 20 years ago. And I was just getting my first email address. And content marketing has changed 100-fold, since then, as you all know. And I'll be damned if I'm not doing exactly what I said I wanted to do when I grew up. In a way, I'm helping create experiences for individuals through content, through content marketing, and aligning that with hospitals' business objectives around the country to the ends of supporting their organizations. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from in terms of content. And what I'll talk to you about today is how to capture people from an experience standpoint and help move them to action as it relates to your business objectives. I'll start by telling you something you already know. The world is changing. And I'm telling you, this is the best news for rural and critical access hospitals ever. My premise here is that what used to require mass media and big budgets to accomplish, and is incredibly hard to compete with gigantic health systems around, because of the diversification of channels, because of digital, because of analytics, can be accomplished in a super targeted, super measurable way that was never possible before. So just a little backdrop and on how the world is changing, I think connects to some of the things that Randy and Fred were sharing with us. They looked at some of the demography, and I'll look at some of the channels that are surrounding the same thing. So here's an ad from 1991 at Radio Shack. This is all the flyer for the stuff you could buy weekly. And all this is on your smartphone right now. And somebody sent this to me. And I thought, I get it, most of it, but there's this one in the middle, the tiny dual super something radar detector. I was wondering about that, but it's true. I looked it up. I downloaded one for my phone. You can actually get a radar detector. So any of you that, if I run over and anybody's got to race back to the airport or something, recommend downloading the Escort Radar app, which is pretty handy. So in addition to having all this supercomputing power at our fingertips in mobile, the price of access to technology has just absolutely flattened since the 1980s, as you can tell by the price of PCs and this graph flattening out. And the number of people consuming content online worldwide has just gone through the roof as well. So from that standpoint, whoops, I think I may have gone one too far, sorry. From that standpoint, the landscape of information. And one question that I got a couple of weeks ago was, I was in Oklahoma at a hospital, and they said, we're in a really rural environment, and we hear you, everybody's online and everybody's consuming information there, but one of the sentiments we get from our senior leadership is that that doesn't really apply in a really rural environment. I started thinking about that, and I was like, you know what, I wonder if that is true. It doesn't feel accurate, but I wanted to look at the data, and so we did. So this is some of the same source data that Randy shared with us earlier from the Pew Internet and American Life study, where we looked at Facebook users overall. 71% of Americans are on Facebook consuming content. When we move to a rural environment, it's true, that person's senior leadership is right. Not as many people are using Facebook as a content consumption channel, but it's really close. It's 69% of rural audiences consuming content on Facebook compared to 71% of all adults overall. And when we look at people that are using their smartphones for access to information, we looked at a different study here, 50% compared to 63%. So there's a little bit of truth to the idea that depending on the marketplace, depending on the urbanicity, there's a little bit less adoption of this kind of huge explosion of channels. But it's really close. And if you're thinking about how to gain market share in an environment where you're not going to necessarily be able to compete on the mass media level, big TV budgets and those sorts of things, the idea that we can really find people where they are on digital platforms and through some really targeted use of analytics is absolutely applicable, whether it's in a rural environment, an urban environment, at a gigantic health system, or at a critical access hospital. So this certainly isn't all-encompassing, but I think it's illustrative. If you think about the channels that we were using to market in healthcare 20 years ago, from billboards and yellow pages, newspaper advertisements, radio and TV, to the scope of channels that people are using to market with content now, it's exploded. And there's a ton of diversification in terms of where to be. But I would assert that this is where the biggest opportunity for smaller hospitals and for rural hospitals is in being able to find people where they are in that healthcare decision-making cycle and target them in these channels. And that's what I want to talk about over the next part of the presentation, is what's connecting with people and how to find them. So in keeping with the David and Goliath theme, I wanted to offer a couple of pebbles that you could use for your slingshot in thinking about capturing market share from some of your large competitors. We'll cover it in just a couple of simple categories. Engagement through content, both relevance of content and volume of content. And I'll talk about that through the lens of content marketing and what we're seeing work really well. Clarity through data analytics and predictive modeling. So if we're going to find people, what are the data that we have access to at our fingertips inside of our organizations and with partners that we can use to really find people at the moment of opportunity for our businesses. Precision through digital targeting and delivery. We heard a little bit about that earlier today from Fred and from Randy, and I'll show you how we're seeing some of the principles that they articulated work really effectively. And then results through niche service line marketing, really picking a few battles and orchestrating those really well in an effort to drive revenue and gain market share. And then continuous improvement through monitoring and optimization. I'll share with you some of the things that we've learned as an organization over the past couple of years, orchestrating strategies like the ones that we'll share here. And of course, I'll be very interested in feedback from the group there as well. Please stop me anytime as we go through to ask questions and make comments. I believe I left plenty of breathing room in the content here for us to do that and still have plenty of time. I got more good news. Content is still absolutely king. One of the things, and you probably expect to hear this from a guy in a content marketing business, but one of the things that we've seen over and over is that if we can really find people with relevant and engaging content, that we can move them to action. And there's three variables that are important to think about. The first one is volume. The second one is value. And then the third is velocity in terms of how quickly you're providing content to individuals. So I'll talk about the volume piece first. So here's a study that we looked at with one of our partners, HubSpot, on the impact of content, just of blogs, just looking at blog content on the amount of leads that an organization captures from an inbound marketing standpoint. So think about marketing for a niche service line and your blog. And let's say you're promoting gastroenterology for your hospital. One of the things that we saw is that the more content that people are generating that's really relevant on the subject, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, really relevant, the more leads they're getting from an inbound perspective, people kind of seeking them out for care. Here's another way to look at the same data. Organizations that are generating 15 or more relevant pieces of content every month on a given subject are generating 2.5 times the leads of organizations that are producing less content. So from a content volume standpoint, the amount of content that is relevant to consumers really makes an impact on the way Google rates you and consumers are able to find you. Really has an impact on the degree to which you're able to convert people. And the velocity of that. This idea of generating what we would call content at scale, 15 or more pieces of content a month, seems to really make a big impact on the volume of leads that organizations are getting. Here's another piece of data. We looked at all of the organizations in 3 different categories. We looked at healthcare, finance, and retail. And one of the things that we found is that if we're not using a strategy like paid search, like search engine marketing or paid social media, and we just want to make an impact on people's behavior by using content over time, it really takes a while. Across all these 3 categories that I just mentioned, this 5-month mark was kind of the magic number of where we started seeing producing content at scale start having a really dramatic effect on the amount of traffic that these organizations were able to garner and get. So if you think about this from a competitive landscape standpoint, as a small organization trying to compete with a Goliath organization who's in the market area or stealing market share or generating out-migration for you, a simple thing like content at scale, volume, and velocity, enough content on a regular basis can make a really big difference. However, there's another dimension to this that we've seen, which is it has to be super relevant in terms of what's in it for the consumer. And you guys have heard this, I'm sure, but I would assert, and I think many of you might as well, that as healthcare marketers, we have a tendency to focus on the things that are great about us. Our new 64-slice CT scanner, or great docs who have joined our organization. Which is all, good and valuable stuff. But what we've seen over and over and over is that consumers don't seem to care. They don't seem to care unless they're at a really specific moment of need. So if you're out shopping for a 64-slice CT scanner, or you're out looking for imaging, you might care about the technology piece. Or if you're looking for a specific doctor at that moment of need, you might care about the doctor piece. But we looked at 4,000 consumer surveys in print that we deployed from magazines that we're doing all over the country. And this was over the course of 2 or 3 years. And one of the things that we asked consumers that we were targeting with these magazines is, how do you like to receive information? What types of information are valuable to you to come from your local hospital? And overwhelmingly, at the end of the spectrum where everybody cared, was this lifestyle stuff. Food and nutrition, learning about aging and health, men's health, women's health, diet and exercise. All of these lifestyle-focused messages that, as I'm sure you can all relate to, are about what's in it for me as a consumer. How do I make my life better? How do I help my family lead a healthier life? And at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, way down on the list, was hospital news and awards, technology, physician profiles, demonstrating that resonance of content was really in that lifestyle category. I should mention also that while in the print domain, we rely on that self-reported information. We send out all these surveys and we say, what do you read about? And people report that back. On the digital side, we don't have that same reliance, right? We just simply look and see what are people clicking, what are they spending time reading, and it's the exact same thing. And so one piece of data that I would share is that this translation, this movement from a traditional print marketing environment to a more diversified and digital marketing environment uses the exact same content strategy, at least in terms of what we're seeing resonate with consumers. Here's what I would be asking. So what if it's what people want to read? How do we know that it's working? Like, does it make a difference? If you're going to talk about food and nutrition and aging and health, how can you tie that to performance? So I've got just one quick example on this slide, which is a publishing strategy, it's a print magazine. And it's from a decent-sized health system. Had multiple locations, so we're doing multiple versions that were targeting a real similar demography, okay, across a big geographic spread. But the content strategies were really different. We had a couple of magazines that were focused really on that lifestyle piece. A lot of food and nutrition, aging and health. And I'm not saying there's nothing in it from the hospital. It's like, 100 steps to a healthy heart. I'm actually a really terrible writer, so we'd never write 100 steps to a healthy heart, but you know what I mean. So 100 steps to a healthy heart, but then the call to action in the sidebar that is around that information is simply, and we're here if you ever need us. And we've got great cardiologists, and here's a number to call, and here's how you get in touch with us. So the lead was about what's in it for consumers. On the other end of the spectrum, we had hospitals that were really focused on technology and docs and a much harder sell, as we call it. And here's what we found. Everybody who focused on lifestyle, even if it was a blend, and you could get away a little bit from that technology and doctor profile piece, had a much better ROI than the organizations that were focused on that harder sell approach. So from a content standpoint, the velocity in terms of volume of content over time, the value of that content in terms of how you connect it with what consumers are interested in, and the volume of that content, simply generating enough of it that you can reach a groundswell to really move people to action, all make a huge difference from a content marketing standpoint. So that's a little bit about the kind of content piece. Let's talk about the data piece and how to tie analytics and performance to the things that we're doing from a marketing standpoint. Anybody ever feel like this? I'm made to sit in the corner like that pretty regularly because of backing up my ideas with data. But so one of the things that has been a big boon for many of the smaller hospitals that we're working with is leveraging their data. Simple data that you have access to from the finance department through partnership there, through your clinical partnerships, and then sometimes with an outside partner. And I know you're all familiar with a host of organizations that offer analytics support to organizations. But from a shoestring data analytics standpoint, thinking about how to leverage data to targeting ends to really find opportunities, here's what we've seen work really, really well. Is taking the data, whether it's from finance or with a partner, and looking at service line performance. Pretty straightforward stuff. Everybody already knows what the big ones are, right? So orthopedics is doing great, and cardiology is doing great, and you've got bariatrics, I'm sure that's doing great. But instead of looking just at the service line level and thinking about marketing promotion from a service line standpoint, where we've seen a lot of success is in hospitals digging a little bit deeper and finding where the opportunity is that might be a hidden gem in terms of untapped potential. I'll show you a case study in just a second of an organization that looked at their wound care center as a really profitable component of the organization that they could build a really specific patient segment around and say, what does a typical really profitable patient for wound care look like for us? And then through partnership with True North, we were able to build a predictive model to go out and find lookalike patients to try and drive profitable business to their wound care center. Another example in this same category was an organization who came to us, and we were looking at their data, and they said, look, we know we need to market orthopedics. It's one of our most profitable service lines, and we've got some big surgeons. And so all of us kind of naturally started thinking about, okay, well, what are you doing from a joint replacement standpoint, and how are we going to focus on that? And that's big message. And but in your market, how are we going to differentiate from a joint replacement standpoint? But as we dug into the data and got a little deeper, one of the things that we found was it wasn't joint replacement at all. The big opportunity that nobody in their market area was marketing was ankle and ankle procedures. They were making a lot of money there. They had a great surgeon who was doing a great job on ankle procedures, and we found opportunity in the market area to be able to go after these ankle procedures where the rest of the competition, the much larger entities, were going after a comprehensive joint replacement. We were able to tie that to a really meaningful ROI. So the big message from me on the analytics front is simply that the obvious opportunity is not always the best opportunity, particularly for a small hospital or a rural hospital. If you're going to pick your stones for your slingshot, many times those are untapped potential that you can uncover either independently or in partnership with an organization through looking at your data. Here's that wound care case study. I covered up all the logos in my stuff just to be polite, but don't conceal it, let us heal it. We built a really targeted model and used print, a direct mail campaign that was focused on reaching out to a segment of the population that met the demographic profile and met the predictive model, wasn't already a patient of the organization, and then we held out a group of individuals that looked just like them and didn't do any marketing to that group. And over time, we looked at the performance and said, how do we do? How did the direct mail campaign do in driving marketing conversions? And you can see that for patient encounters, we were able to generate a 62% uplift in the targeted group from marketing compared to the control group. So we see a good volume boost there. We were able to show 104% impact on revenue compared to the control group. So a big differential lift that we were able to demonstrate because of the targeting that we were using. And from an ROI standpoint, the organization was able to invest comparatively to a mass media campaign very little on a really, really targeted print campaign and generate a really meaningful ROI in terms of response and demonstrable conversions to their wound center through the targeting that we did. And that's just in print. From a digital standpoint, which I'll talk about next, we're able to target even more precisely around very specific procedures and service lines based on the decision cycle. I'll stop there for just a sec. Any questions so far? So we looked at a couple of funnels today in terms of the buying process. And I agree with those. I think they're perfect. Here's something that we found in a similar approach to the one that I just shared for Wound Center, doing a combined print and digital campaign. And when I talk about a combined print and digital campaign, I'm talking about direct mail like we just talked about for the Wound Center. But I'm also talking about paid search and paid social media placement driving to a landing page where we're trying to get people to make appointments and convert to a service. So this was for a rural hospital, and we were running an orthopedics campaign. And it worked great. We targeted the direct mail with a predictive model, and we did paid search and paid social. And we saw a lot of people come in and schedule appointments for consultations, which was great. But what we saw even more of was this incredible bounce rate, where people were coming in either from the direct mail or they were coming in from ads that we were running in paid search and social. But they weren't finding what they were looking for, and they weren't ready to make an appointment, and they were diving back out of the site and the content. And what we started talking about was the premise that we're probably finding a lot of really qualified people that are at this conversion stage. You know, these people that are in the marketplace that we're targeting, that are ready, ready to consider joint replacement surgery or minimally talk to a physician about that. But 80% of the people that we're seeing convert to our site or convert from direct mail, they're not at that phase, and we've got to find a way to go upstream. And so we built a really simple decision cycle that's proved really, really effective as it relates to the type of content we serve up to consumers and when. And that is engagement, interaction, and conversion. So at the engagement level, we're finding people that are just interested in consuming content, just interested in learning a little bit more about their options, learning a little bit more about getting back to a healthy lifestyle, being able to walk upstairs, being able to take the grandkids to the park, being able to play golf. At the interaction level, we're having a lot of success getting people to take an assessment, to ask a question of a nurse navigator or a physician assistant. And then at the conversion level, we're finding that people are coming in to make an appointment or register to come to a seminar. And this change of approach worked dramatically well in re-engineering the campaign so that we started moving people through the funnel a little bit more appropriately based on the types of content that they were consuming and the types of behaviors we saw them engaging in when they were converting from the site. So this is an example from one of our clients who's doing this really well. And you guys may have seen this campaign, but this is an organization who has moved entirely away from print marketing and focuses exclusively on digital, but they're using all that content that they used to use in print. You remember I was talking earlier about content over time. You got to produce content at scale for a meaningful period of time to get people to move to action. That was one of the things that we focused on here, was generating enough content to get people to come in and do a couple of things. To take the Are You a Well-Being assessment, so it allowed them to interact with the organization, to read content from the sponsoring organization here so that if they were ready to connect, they could, and to convert so that they could make appointments and those sorts of things as well. And what we've seen is that content volume over time bears out just like the research says it would, which is over time, we're right at the 6-month mark here in this research, we can see that the traffic that we're generating from organic search and from direct traffic is coming very much into focus compared to our baseline period of time, which is the orange bar, where we saw much more traffic supported by direct. Now the bump, which is what we'd expect if we're generating enough relevant content to really move the needle in the search engines over time. So when I think about how we focus your efforts from a marketing standpoint and driving people to a really focused campaign, here's what we've seen work great. I talked about the predictive modeling and use of direct mail. And then targeted search and targeted social, really optimizing that ad spend so that you're focused on exactly the audience that you want to reach based on the service line that you're promoting. And there's all kinds of great resources to do this, as we heard from Randy and Fred earlier on Google and on Facebook, for the types of things that people are liking, the types of keywords that we're targeting, so that we're moving people to a really focused campaign page and that conversion path that is engagement, interaction, and conversion, moving people to action. So I'll show you just a couple of examples of how this works. And here's that conversion path mapped out. You can see what we found is that Google and Facebook are good for really different things. When we do paid search in Google, and we're typically doing that with a partner organization, we're finding that that's a great place to find people that are searching at a compares or might merit a physician appointment. They're willing to give us their email address for those results. And what we've seen is that if we use a trigger email that says, hey, thanks for coming and taking our assessment. If we haven't met all your needs, we've got a nurse navigator that we'd love to connect you with to ask a question. We can get people to come back to the site and convert by asking a question or filling out an appointment for a seminar or, a form for a seminar or an appointment at a 300% better rate than we can if we're just targeting them with direct mail and paid search. So this idea of nurturing and finding people a little bit earlier in the campaign funnel has been really, really effective. Here's a few examples of that. The first one is from a client focused on urology. So urology might not be a, big billing service line that many of you think about competing for market share on with Goliaths. But at the same time, this client found that there was a lot of opportunity in this one category. And we built exactly this campaign strategy that we're talking about. A hyper-targeted mailing strategy, a really focused paid search and paid social strategy that brings people in where they can make an appointment, take an assessment, or they can engage in the type of content that they're interested in, and they can give us their email address so we can bring them back to the site. Another example in the exact same category is a mammogram screening for women's health that we focused on. You can make an appointment, you can read content, you can submit your email address so that we can stay in touch with more information, or you can get results, and it brings people back. And we're seeing this work over and over again. Here's an example where we're not just seeing impressions and volume of engagement, but we're seeing real ROI in terms of procedure volumes that we can attribute specifically to people that are coming in, filling out forms, calling the phone number, and coming through to become patients. You can see here we looked at 6 months of procedure volumes from September through February, where we looked at trending data year over year and also volumes attributable specifically to our campaign here, compared to the marketing spend that was able to demonstrate 3.7 to 1 ROI in terms of dollars spent. So those are the things that I wanted to touch on today. If I think about the road ahead, any takeaways from me would include content is still king as it relates to how you connect with your audience and if you're going to compete for market share with behemoths. To pick your battles as it relates to finding a really focused opportunity among not just your service lines, but the procedure level of service lines that you're focused on. And to use a really targeted approach that is very, very measurable so that you can demonstrate not just that you're able to move the needle incrementally, but that you're able to do so in a way that is at least as, if not more effective than trying to compete at the mass market level for market share. And with that, I'll stop and take questions. Yes? Great question. So yes, when we ask for an email address, we're including a disclaimer in there that says that by giving us their email address, they're empowering us to reach out to them with follow-up information related to what they've expressed interest in. Also, one of the things that's been really effective in data management for these forms, where we're capturing really specific leads about really specific procedures with a lot of personal health information, is that all of that is being housed in a secure HIPAA-compliant warehouse of data that is accessible to on the client side, but also managed in the examples that I'm showing you by True North in our data warehouse, so that it's HIPAA compliant. Other questions?